Seasons, bleedings, my pagan cultural appropriators, welcome back to our first ever Christmas episode of Horror Convos.
I'm so excited!
A casual, relaxing, and occasionally funny podcast where we pick one horror topic per episode and discuss anything related to it that we want. Movies, series, novels, comics, video games, radio dramas, nothing is off limits here. New episodes release every other Wednesday. I regularly have guests join the show as we exchange opinions and personal experiences with the topic while citing examples that portray it from the good to the bad and the... Horror Convos is available to listen to on YouTube and Spotify. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and come hang out at the Horror Convos Facebook page to share your thoughts and leave suggestions for how we can improve the show. If you enjoy our stuff, be sure to like, subscribe, and stuff that notification bell like a fat stocking so you never miss when our newest content is uploaded. If you've been too naughty this year for Santa to gift you a lifetime subscription to YouTube Red, you can listen to our full podcast free of advertisements at patreon.com/horrorconvos. Tier 1 membership gets you ad-free episodes among other exclusive content, while Tier 2 membership grants you access to vote on polls for future topics when they go up. We appreciate every dollar donated to help our little podcast grow. I'm your host, Keith Harris, and this is a very special episode for me. I had my doubts at times whether I'd make it this far. Today marks the last episode of our first year doing Horror Convos.
I'm so excited!
The next time I upload will be in January 2025, year of our Lord. I hoped to end this year on a strong episode, and thankfully the stars aligned for me to have a fun, very educational conversation. Today will be our first discussion of independent, low-budget horror, and here to take us on this Yuletide ride before we take a break for the holidays, we have a special new guest. He's the host of the horror podcast VHS Doom. Please welcome, for the first time, Dylan Doom. So, Dylan, for those who are new to your podcast, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and what the premise of VHS Doomed is?
Sure, yeah. So VHS Doom, it's a podcast between my best friend, Mikey, and myself. So he lives in Connecticut. I live in Virginia now. We used to both live in New Jersey, very close to one another, and we would have movie nights. I've always been a cinema fan, but he has always been like a horror guy. I think his movie collection, the last estimate was somewhere over like 3,000 titles or something that he just has, in his house.
Damn!
And a lot of that is horror. So he would introduce me to all these wild films at movie nights. And then, we both moved away, moved out to separate areas of the country. And last year, I guess, it's been about a year and change now. We decided like, hey, why don't we start a podcast and talk about horror movies? I mean, everybody else does it. So, so we did that. We both are, fans of, I guess we're both millennials, right? So we came up through our childhoods. We're at that like peak or nearing the end peak of, visiting rental stores with your parents, or going in as a teenager and picking out, movies from Blockbuster, Hollywood Video, or something like that. Yeah. So I was like, dude, why don't we create a show that is a VHS rental store? Like, let's be a video rental store, and we can send people home, quote unquote, every week with rentals, just like, we liked doing when we were kids. So that's VHS Doom in a nutshell. It's kind of morphed into this, it's almost like an audio adventure now. So we've created all of these characters. We have Balthazar, who's like a half demon, half human counter clerk and part-time hitman. We have a demon who kind of like rules the universe that we live in, which we call ourselves, or we call it the Void. That's where we exist. So we have a ton of characters. Pamela Voorhees actually is our backroom video attendant. So
look what you did to him.
we voice a lot of characters throughout the show and try to make it as fun as possible. Through Halloween, actually, we did a like Halloween quote unquote road trip where we visited the places that the movies that we covered took place, and that was again just us voicing things and a bunch of sound effects and stuff. So it's a fun time. It's turned into something I wasn't expecting in the beginning, and people seem to like it. So that's VHS Doom in a nutshell.
This is very interesting to me. This is the first time I'm doing an episode on a subject that I know literally pretty much nothing about. And
right.
I have one rule I have for guests coming onto the show is I always let them pick the topic, so it's something that they can educate me about, potentially give me some perspective on that I didn't really have before, while also being able to, really get into what they're passionate about, something that really hypes up their interest. Because of course that's the secret to good content is talking to people who actually have something they want to talk to you about. We're not just flying by the seat of our pants here.
Sure.
Sometimes that works. Some podcasters are good at doing that. I am not that talented. But So Alfonso first brought this up to me, and then you brought it up in our messages back and forth on Facebook. Yes, showing our age there.
All right.
I remember when Facebook was like the newest thing. Like it was just overtaking MySpace, and it's like now apparently you're a boomer if you still use it, and it's like I'm just like, why though?
Right.
Like what?
You gotta get. Well, I don't even know what's like TikTok. I guess TikTok is the thing now, right? Or a Snapchat, something like that.
Well, I don't know if you've heard, but from what I've read, apparently VHS is actually making a comeback. It's like Alien Romulus that they came out with they advertised that they're developing a VHS release for it.
Oh, really? They're putting something new or like new out on VHS? That's interesting. Okay.
I haven't personally bought it. I mean, I fell out of love with the Alien franchise years ago. I have no interest in anything past Resurrection. Yeah. And even with that franchise, I would say it peaked at Aliens. And so I like some things about Alien 3, but I did not agree with killing off Newt and Hicks and ending on such a morbid note with the original Ripley's story before she died. I thought that was a complete mishandling of what could have been a near perfect trilogy. Apparently VHS is starting to make a comeback because we are living in an age where like retro media is becoming like the new fad, and I don't know when exactly it started. Maybe like it had something to do with Stranger Things, just bringing back the craze of the 80s. Yeah. But it's like there really is like this new market now. It's like we've always known that, nostalgia has a market. Movies play to that all the time. And TV as well. But they really are starting to sell it as a literal product now to where it's like, vinyl's coming back, VHS is coming back. Now, if we could just get cars to start doing white wall tires again. It's like I am a huge lover of classic cars, anything from the 90s onward. I think modern cars really just lost their way when it came to individuality, creativity, style. Sure. It's like anything from the like the Model T era. Well, that's a little far back for me, but I would argue anything from the 50s up through the 80s. That was really the peak of cars having style. Like stuff you actually wanted to be seen driving, and it's like it sucks. I kick myself for not being able to drive. It's like I'm high functioning on the autism spectrum. Some people on the spectrum just, they struggle with driving, and it's like, it's just such a cruel joke that this is my favorite era of cars, and not only do I not drive, I never learn stick shift because I go to these classic car shows with my dad. Yeah. And it's just like, oh my God, if I had the money and the skill, I would get this damn car. This beautiful late 50s Chevy.
Oh yeah, gotta love them, man. I feel like you are right. I had when I was right out of high school, I paid like $600 for a 1989 IROC Z28 383 stroker Camaro. It ate gas up like, I don't know. I was chugging gallons of water. Like it was just You know what I mean? Like the gas was crazy, but it was a lot of fun and it was unique and it sounded cool. And now I drive just a regular old, dad truck. But yeah, no, that's a good era. That's a good eras of cars. And you're right. Now, I mean, what would you drive a Cybertruck? If you were driving something, would you get into a Cybertruck? I don't think I would.
I have very mixed feelings about the future of automated automobiles. It's just like there are some features that I think should come standard in all vehicles in the future, like a rear view camera. Not that it should become so automated that people lose their incentive to learn the classic skills like checking your mirrors and, learning to do things yourself. Like that's one of the biggest dangers of automation in general, I think, is people becoming so dependent on technology that they forget how to do anything for themselves. But there are definitely certain features, I think, advanced, quote unquote, auto cars should incorporate. One of them I would absolutely get behind is 24/7 recording cameras.
Oh, that's
so
a great
that anytime
idea. Yeah.
anytime you get into an accident, just have a camera that comes standard on your dashboard. And this wouldn't just go for accidents. It could be, dealings with police or if someone attempts to rob your car or vandalize it. It's like every vehicle should have the ability to record what's going on around it at all times. Means that if you don't personally want that for privacy reasons, you could have the option to disable it yourself. And these cameras should be linked to auto companies as well. So like in the event of an accident, then the footage would automatically go to them. And they should, if I remember right, I think legally speaking, auto companies have their own laws and jurisdictions when it comes to footage that they own or what they can share with authorities. I don't believe that they're required to turn over whatever the police tell them. And so if by chance, let's say you get in an accident or you got mugged outside your car and the police didn't show up in time to get footage of the guy, then that footage would then, unbeknownst to the mugger, ideally be recorded, sent to the auto companies. They'll have your insurance information, so ideally you don't get screwed over if anything happened to your vehicle. And then they will have that footage that you can then collaborate with them to send to the police. So it really should become a collaborative relationship to increase personal security. The other feature I would recommend become standard in the future is sensory detectors to help cars stop automatically if you don't react in time to do it, in order to ideally prevent high-level impacts. And, it's like I see these commercials all the time. We'll stop in time within a certain distance. We hear about cars going from 0 to 100 in however many seconds. Yeah. So we should really improve future vehicles' ability to stop on a dime or brake on a dime just as quickly.
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, this technology should really be invested into mitigating the inherent danger factor on the road as much as possible. But again, without becoming so automated that people lose their natural skills that help them be competent drivers as well. So that's my 2 cents. There's a real gray area, a balancing act in there between how much is too much, whether it's technology versus people being left to their own skill sets and reaction time. So I don't support going too far in either direction.
Sure. Yeah. No. Okay. No, I feel like that's. I like your ideas. If you could combine that style from like the 50s to the 80s with practicality and functionality that we have the ability to do.
I'm telling you, man,
that'd be pretty cool.
We're going to see at some point, I believe, some manufacturer is going to come out with a retro series of vehicles. And it says, I am a diehard defender of white wall tires. I think with the right color scheme, they're absolutely beautiful. They do show dirt and wear and tear more easily. I agree with that. But from a stylistic standpoint, it's like I always tell myself, we're bringing back vinyl, we're bringing back VHS. One day the world's going to realize its mistake and bring back white walls. I keep waiting for that day.
I like it.
One
I like
day.
it. One day it's coming. Very nice.
Hey.
Awesome, man.
So I'll get us back on topic, but yeah. So this was the first time I heard about this when you talked about it for suggesting a topic for us to discuss.
Okay.
SOV, or shot on video.
Yes.
I have no experience with this genre at all, outside of maybe a couple films I've seen from that really 90s direct-to-video era.
Sure.
Where some of the absolute cheapest looking shit, like a Thanksgiving, for instance, the really like bottom of the barrel, like Ginger Dead Man, the kind of low budget horror that almost nobody in the mainstream era knew existed. But you could find some real gems here, or despite it how shoestring budget they were.
Sure.
And some of these independent filmmakers, this apparently is a subgenre of independent horror filmmaking that has gone under the radar for so long that it's virtually never been promoted by big mainstream studios. Some of these films you won't even find on VHS. I'd honestly never heard of them.
Yeah.
But could you tell us, for those listening who aren't familiar with this, what the shot on video genre is and how it differs from other low budget horror? Like, how does this differ from the found footage genre, for instance?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So shot on video specifically is a film that has been filmed on usually VHS, Betamax. There are some that are classified as shot on video that were made on Super 8, but then transferred to tape later. But so it's the best way to classify this is someone has taken their video camera. They've taken nearly no budget whatsoever, and they've gotten their group of friends together or locals, and they've filmed the movie that they had in their head. And then they put it out for the world to see. A lot of them are, very under the radar, but still somehow influential in a very cult way. It's like ultra cult almost. So I don't know. I kind of relate shot on video. So if like horror is the metal of movies, right? It's the metal music to movies. Shot on video is like the punk rock. They don't have their shit together, but they're making a film or music anyway. So that's the real basic definition of shot on video. It's super low budget, ultra low budget, usually poor camera work in most cases, and they make their own effects and they do everything in house, and then they put out their creative project. So it's definitely not going to appeal to a wide audience, but there are people who find love for it. I kind of think if you're the type of person who will take the time to watch a movie that your little cousin made, right, and you're also a horror fan, then you have that patience. You'll watch something and invest your time in something that may not turn out to be what you like, but you're checking it out anyway. You may find some shot on video horror that you enjoy. So that's kind of like the basic gist of shot on video.
So you said BH Max or BTX?
Oh, sorry.
What is it?
Beta. Yeah, Betamax.
Betamax.
So Betamax was, and I'm going to go ahead and preface this by saying I am not an expert in any of those media formats either. I just kind of am interested by them, but I don't know a ton. But I have a general knowledge. So Betamax was a video format that either predated or came out right around the same time as VHS. So same kind of tape system. I think they're typically like really large wheels rather than in a VHS. It's like two smaller wheels that move the tape across. But other than that, I don't know a lot about it. But so I do know that kind of what helped spur shot on video and also just independent, film in general was was actually like the portable personal camera equipment that became available to the public. And it was actually during World War II, a lot of that was developed so they could take cameras into, war to get footage and stuff like that. And then after the war, they made this available to the public. So like Super 8, became a thing. I think, didn't Steven Spielberg make a movie called Super 8? And it was like inspired by his
I went
childhood.
to see that in theaters when it came out. Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of barely remember that, but I think that was kind of an exciting film if I remember. But I think he did that as an homage because he started making films as a kid on Super 8 cameras, if I'm remembering correctly.
I believe so. Yeah,
grow his love for filmmaking. So essentially, what these shot on video like horror fans did was they a lot of them emulated their icons in horror and made movies based on things that they wanted that they'd kind of seen in other horror movies, right? So I don't know if you want to like start jumping into any titles in particular, but there's one that kind of it's very early on.
Oh no, you're totally fine. Again, not an expert. He says you know a hell of a lot more than I do.
One day I want
now.
to be,
what I'm trying to understand, just if you could explain it to me, like I'm 5. Eve, what is the difference between the kind of cameras that are these things are shot on versus like I have heard of films being shot on people's phones,
sure.
like iPhones. I've heard of stuff being shot on Super 8 cameras.
Mm-hmm.
Are these films done with like, is this the kind of camera that you would stick a tape into?
Yes.
And then just start recording it like those heavy duty kind of cameras? Like you'd see newscasters use cameras like this in the 90s. It's like for those of you who have seen 1998's Godzilla, which I will die on the hill of defending, like it is not a good Godzilla movie, but I think it is a great movie. In terms of those fun disaster subgenre of 90s movies that were so popular at that time. But if you remember Hank Azaria's character, or whatever his name was, who filmed Godzilla's giant foot barely missing him with that newscaster camera, and then he got the tape in to get footage of it, and like he broke the story on the creature when it was first starting its rampage through New York. That's the kind of camera I'm thinking of from what you're describing. So is Betamax a lot like that, essentially?
Kind of, yeah. I believe there were Betamax cameras. I might be wrong on that because I really don't know. I don't know much about Betamax, but I know that certain of these shot on video films were filmed on Betamax, which was a type of cartridge, right? Just like a VHS. So yeah, there were probably specific Betamax cameras, but yes, these shot on video films, most of them, that I'll talk about, one, like I said, is on Super 8, but most of them are that style of camera where you've taken the tape, loaded it into the camera, put it on your shoulder or a tripod, and now you're filming your friends, act a fool. So that's the like,
okay.
Definition of this type of shot on video.
So it's sort of like when Jackass first started out, like when they were doing the real gritty, rugged, very cheap cameras before they got picked up by MTV and really expanded their budget.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that VHS style. I think they were probably working with DVI, which was like the smaller. They kind of made everything a lot smaller. I don't know if you remember, when we were kids, you could get video recorders that you could hold in one hand. So we're not.
I had one of those as a kid. I don't know if you remember it. This was not a VHS or Betamax related thing. I tried independent horror filmmaking very briefly when I was in like middle school. I got this thing that at the time was, the new hotness as far as what was on the market. It was something called I got rid of this thing years ago. I wish I had kept it. I could be showing it on the camera for listeners. I believe it was something called Digital Blue. Did you ever hear of it?
That sounds familiar. But I can't picture it.
I think that's what it was called, Digital Blue, Sense and Blue, or something like that. But it was this, true to its name. It was a blue color schemed digital camera, very basic. You literally just film stuff with it in hand, and then you could plug it into your computer. This was like way before, the really pocket size stuff that people just plug in, or on like USB size things. This was way before the iPod or iPhones or anything like that. Yeah. But I made a very cheap looking sort of home invasion. Nice. Halloween knockoff. Serial killer breaks into my house, and I'm hiding from him in the dark, and then. No. I actually dressed up as the killer, and I had a friend of mine film himself, like Blair Witch style, with the camera, trying to imitate, the crying, snotting face. He's like, "Oh my God, where is he? Is he gone?" And then the footage ended with me in my Michael Myers mask, coming at him with like a fake knife, and it just cut off there. Like the footage suddenly just went rip. And that was my only attempt at doing that. I looked at it on our home monitor computer back when dinosaurs walked the earth and we were still using those cube monitors. And I pretty much gave it up at that point. I was going to make so many movies on this thing. Like I was planning like an action movie at one point with like another friend of mine, and I did trying to choreograph fight scenes like in the middle of middle school, and some of the kids and teachers were looking at us while we were rehearsing, just like, what the hell are these kids doing? and it's just, oh my God, it was so cringy. But that's where my experience with attempting at low budget home video making movies ended. It was my introduction into finding my love for independent horror, as far as low budget stuff like Night of the Living Dead, The Evil Dead, the original Halloween, Saw. I loved learning about all these films that were done on like shoestring budgets with like bare minimum what was available, cameras, makeup, asking people if they wanted to be volunteer extras because you couldn't even pay them. And I love any horror film that manages to prove itself under limited resources. Is it because that's really where you find a lot of the most innovative stuff, some of the most creative ideas? Necessity is the mother of invention and all that. It's so as schlocky as it can look, like referencing The Evil Dead or Night of the Living Dead again. They're very much products of their time. I have nothing but respect for people who manage to make a successful movie. Do those rags to riches kinds of Cinderella stories. For those of you listening, if you want a list of shot on video films that you might want to look at, I'll link this article in the description down below for those of you on YouTube listening. Look up Bleeding Skull, the 50 best shot on video films, and there's so many things on here. I unfortunately wasn't familiar with any of them. I'd never heard of any of these, but you've got Video Violence, 1987, Zombie Army, 1991, year I was born right there. The Burning Moon, 92, and the immortalized classic 2009's Trash Humpers. So there's a whole world of diamonds in the rough that you can open the door to if you want to. You've heard of entering the survival horror. This would be entering the SOV horror. So enter at your own risk. I have no idea what you might be in for. Dylan, why don't you tell us about a few examples of SOV that you think everyone should say?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So I've picked out probably more than I should have, but there are some that were more influential than others, and we'll kind of discuss those. So the first one, and this is not on the list that was mentioned there, but Weasels Rip My Flesh. It's from 1979. It was directed by a 16-year-old kid named Nathan Schiff. So Nathan he picked up a Super 8 camera, and he had been making films since he was 11 or 12. But Weasels Rip My Flesh managed to gain some like regional popularity. So that's one thing with these shot on video films, which is interesting, is you get a lot of regional flair because these kids or young adults are using their friends and filming in a specific area of the country. So you get a lot more like regional dialect, a lot more, euphemisms from the area, which is kind of cool to see. So this film came out of Long Island. It was shot on a $400 budget. It is absurd. So essentially this rocket, which he is a model rocket that he made and filmed taking off, blasting off, goes to, I don't know, Venus or something like that, collects samples, returns, crashes, and two little Long Island kids riding their bikes near a swamp see this rocket and these cans of goo. And while they're looking at that, a weasel bites one of the boys' legs. So in retaliation, they pour this goo down the weasel's hole, and it turns into a crazy, disgusting weasel killer monster. Obviously, it's shot by a 16-year-old kid, right? And all of his friends. But they got some adults to act in it. There are some interesting practical effects. There's definitely, blood, guts, and gore to it. And it was influential enough that Nathan later was flown out to, like horror conventions, and he talked about his, process through making Weasels Rip My Flesh. And surprisingly, it was popular enough and influential enough in like the cult scene that I don't know if you know K&B Effects, but Howard Berger, who was a founding member of K&B Effects, actually helped to do the commentary and on the extras of the remaster of Weasels Rip My Flesh. And also Scooter McRae, who was pretty popular in the shot on video scene, was on that as well. So yeah, if you haven't ever checked out Weasels Rip My Flesh, 1979, directed by Nathan Schiff, go check it out. Yeah, it's a fun one. So that's
as
one.
far as I know, no weasels were harmed in the making of this film.
That's what they say. Yeah, I don't think there were any. I think, what's funny? I think there was actually a hamster, which they called the weasel. It was like obviously, or somebody's pet guinea pig. So I don't think they actually have a real weasel even in the film.
This is what I'm talking about.
Right.
This is the innovation, man.
Right.
And if we can't find a weasel, then we make it the weasel. If I can't find a reindeer, I'll make one instead and steal those Christmas presents. Whatever you don't have, you make.
Right. That's the thing in this film. There's the weasel obviously is like the antagonist, but there's also an evil scientist who's helping or trying to utilize the weasel to further his evil plans. And this guy, he's going to get it in the end. But so when they're filming this project, it's obviously a lot of stolen footage in the sense that they're going out and they're just filming wherever, right? And they're not paying for sets because he's 16. They find a like 6-foot long, full size shark prop in the dumpster behind a business that they're filming at. So they see this and it looks pretty good. So they see the shark and they're like, well, how the hell can we incorporate a full size shark into this film? And they fucking did it. So watch the film and wait for the shark. Hey. That's what I'll say. Yeah.
If somebody could be courageous and smart enough to find a way to make a movie where a zombie fights a shark underwater, my God, someone could find a way to do it with a film about a mutant weasel. Right. Exactly. And it's innovation, right? Well, not innovation. It's just, using your resources, what word am I looking for? I can't even think of the word. Not innovative. Happy accidents and say, hey, whatever. Be resourceful. Some of the best films ever made where it found some of their best ideas and moments by pure chance. It's like, hey, you think Jaws would have turned out as well as it did if the shark hadn't kept breaking down so much that Spielberg had to rethink how much he showed of it before we got into the second act? It's like, how different that movie would have been if he'd been able to do what he originally envisioned with how much of the shark he originally wanted to show from opening scene onward. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so obviously this is no Jaws, but you know what? They got creative, and they did it on $400. So
you're damn
pretty cool.
right. It's not Jaws. It's Weasels, damn it.
Yes, and I will tell you, I don't feel bad saying this because I don't think it's in. You know what? No, you could probably buy the DVD. I think from. I don't know. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Maybe Vinegar Syndrome. But Nathan has provided a copy on YouTube. So if you guys want to go check it out on YouTube, Weasels Rip My Flesh, 1979. The full movie's there. So
I will link that in the description as well. I'll let y'all. Yeah. I'll find it on whatever channel it's on and see if I can link it for people to check it out.
Yeah, there are some good interviews with him too, where he talks about how he put everything together. So that's a good one. Now, all right. Kind of backtracking just a smidge, because I know you had asked me the difference between shot on video and found footage, and I want to answer that before I talk about any further films. So found footage typically is going to be, we'll think about like Blair Witch Project, right? So the difference between shot on video and that is that Blair Witch Project was written to be footage that an individual had taken of themselves or their surroundings.
Yeah. Shot on video, basically.
Yeah. Shot on video is a quote unquote serious or actual script that's just filmed on whatever these people have available. So that's going to be the difference. They're trying to show you a film, as it would be seen in a theater. It's just that the quality of their equipment is much lower. So that's all. That's the big difference between the two. So
I do want to ask you, from what you're describing, like with the Weasels masterpiece, for example, and I'm not being sarcastic, by the way. Like you genuinely got me interested in wanting to find this movie.
Nice.
I would never knock someone for having a low budget. Like if you can find, at the very least, if you can find a way to make an interesting, entertaining story, I don't give a shit how cheap it looks. It's like there is something to be said. Like at a certain point, it is fair to critique a film that goes too far beyond its resources, trying to be more than what it is. But for any low budget film that can take advantage of its medium and play to its strengths within it, I have nothing but respect, unironically, for filmmakers who do that. Because again, I've been there. I know what it's like to work within those limitations, and I had to learn the hard way, how you have to temper your ambition and find a way to make the best story that you can out of the material that you have. And it's like if Sam Raimi hadn't learned to work within limitations on the first Evil Dead, that film would never have become as successful as it did, because people would have taken one look at it and thought it was trying way too hard to be something that it just didn't have the resources to be. And so as a result, the viewer would feel most likely like their time was wasted, because you're asking them essentially to use their imaginations to fill in the gaps of what you weren't able to deliver on. So that's the kind of a low budget schlock that I don't respect.
Sure.
Yeah, but but the diamonds in the rough are the ones where these people know that they're not going to be able to make something extravagant. They know they're going to have to do something small scale. But by God, they find a way to have fun doing it, and they do their best to make something that they think people would enjoy watching, even if it's only for the sheer absurdity of it. The goal with any genre of media shot on any medium, I mean, in my opinion, is to make the viewer feel like they gained something from the experience, or at the very least that they gained more than whatever they lost. Again, it's a balancing act. So even if you go into the most schlocky, silly, like Troll 2 level bottom of the barrel shit, even at the bottom of the barrel, if you look hard enough, you might occasionally find something that catches your attention, or at the very least you feel like, well, that's an hour and a half of my life that I got some good laughs out of. I really do think that we need to tone down the elitism in horror, as far as people looking down their noses at the lower budget stuff, because there's so many classics that you can really miss out on, you know, cult classics or legitimately well-written stories and, you know, actual decent acting that would otherwise go under the radar. Because you got to remember, it's like so many actors from some of the most successful IPs had no formal training, no mainstream experience whatsoever. Or like you look at Mila Jovovich in the Resident Evil films and compare that to when she was just hitting her breakout role in The Fifth Element. And then before that, you take it all the way back to when she was almost a total unknown in little one-off films like Dazed and Confused. You know, a lot of people forget she was in that. I think she was a teenager at the time. Yeah. You know, people love to talk about, you know, Jodie Foster in Silence of the Lambs, but a lot of people forget, you know, her in Taxi Driver.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And not to knock child actors by any means, but she was definitely not ready to hit the big leagues yet with that film. It's like almost any kid could have done that character. But something about her was just so magnetic with how she captured the audience that, lo and behold, she inspired someone to attempt to assassinate a president. So hey, you never know what's going to get your name out there.
Yeah,
you just you can't predict these kinds of things. And so I would say for anyone out there listening who generally isn't interested in the low budget horror, don't sleep on it. Don't just dismiss it out of hand because it looks cheap. Because like some of the best horror films ever made, again, and it look cheap. And I would argue that in some cases that adds to their charm. It's like part of why The Evil Dead was so scary is because it looked so real. It looked gritty. You know, the effects obviously showed their age, and the acting was nothing to write home about. You know, Bruce Campbell was not this was Bruce Campbell at a point where you could tell he was just flying by the seat of his pants here, him and Raimi. But in my opinion, sometimes that works to low budget horror's advantage because it helps it even as schlocky as the story can be, it can help it feel more grounded, more real. Like you're not watching actors, you're watching real people trying to take these extraordinary ideas and really over the top effects and try to make you believe that these characters are actually experiencing this stuff. You know, no matter how shoestring budget it may look.
Yeah. I think there's something about appreciating the art of it, right? And giving your time to those artists who may not have gotten the time from, you know, major studios or whatever, right? So we were lucky, really. We were able to interview Mark Sjostrom, who created Henrietta for Evil Dead 2, on the show a while back.
Really?
And and he very nice guy,
wow.
Super nice guy. He told us all about his journey through film, you know, and effects makeup. And he started on The Mutilator. If you haven't seen The Mutilator, that is not shot on video, but that is totally worth the watch. Please go check it out if you haven't watched The Mutilator. I think it's 1984, 83. But yeah, so if Sam Raimi hadn't made Evil Dead, and you know, Evil Dead 2 being almost a remake of, which is one of my favorite films.
It's a requel, part remake, part sequel.
Requel, right? Yeah. Evil Dead 2, probably one of my favorite films of all time, especially horror films. But if he hadn't done what he did and pushed through and made this, you know, indie Evil Dead, right? And Mark Sjostrom went and saw this in the theater, and he was like, "Oh man, I would like to work on this." Then there wouldn't be Evil Dead 2. There wouldn't be Henrietta. There wouldn't be all of these crazy, you know, things that happen afterward if he hadn't just tried, right? So, yeah.
And if you want to go back even further, you can look at the original short film that would become 1981's The Evil Dead. A lot of people know The Evil Dead, but they don't know about the original proof of concept short Within the Woods. I'll see if I can find that on YouTube and link that in the description as well. If I don't think it's copyrighted since it was never officially used, because this was like, it's the same basic plot structure as Evil Dead. if you were trying to do it in, I think it was like less than 30 minutes. And in that version of the story, I think Bruce Campbell ends up being the antagonist, or like he gets possessed at the end or something, and he ends up killing his own girlfriend, the character that would become Linda. So this is one thing that really fascinates me, especially from a production education standpoint, learning how these films were made.
In that vein, as far as like crazy effects, right? And we'll take it back to like Evil Dead. This next film is absolutely inspired by Evil Dead and probably several other films, because I think they have a character that, I mean, 90% I'm thinking that he was inspired by Freddy Krueger. If he wasn't, I'd be shocked. But so there are two brothers, the Polonia brothers, and they were out of Pennsylvania. I think it was Wellsboro, Pennsylvania. They had been making kind of the same scenario as Nathan Schiff. They'd been making, home movies since they were, 12 or 13 with their friends. And then when they turn 18, they decide they're going to make the most ridiculous, like, quote unquote, feature length film that they can with three guys in a house. It's called Hallucinations. It's from 1986. And it stars and was directed by and written by John Polonia, Mark Polonia, and Todd Michael Smith. So these three guys are hanging out in a house. Mom has to work late, or is staying overnight at work. And they start to get haunted by a spirit. These two, the brothers, the Polonia brothers, they went on to do, 40 plus films, shot, written, directed, produced, whatever. So they're kind of icons in the SOV horror film, because most everything that they produced was shot on video. But this film, actually, they got help from Full Moon Pictures on. So Charles Band donated some stuff to them. I guess they had talked to him and he helped out. But there's a cat that gets killed with a chainsaw. There is a giant, I don't know if I can even say this on here, but a giant penis monster that attacks someone in the shower. There's a Freddy Krueger lookalike murderer, like an evil monk. There is like haunted dolls, kids attacking each other. It is absurd. It's insane. And it's, again, filmed in their house. Three guys, they made it all happen themselves. So that's,
and what did you say the name of this film is?
Hallucinations from 1986. Now that one is on Tubi. Thank you, Tubi, for being awesome like you are. So if you guys want to check that out, you can buy it. Obviously, you can go buy it from, I want to say Vinegar Syndrome has that one, but I might be wrong on that. But you can check it out on Tubi first before you purchase.
Praise to Tubi.
All praise to Tubi. Tubi, sponsor the pod.
For all those horror fans who either can't afford or just haven't learned how to work Shudder.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. And Tubi has stuff that you just can't find anywhere else. I don't think Hallucinations would be on Shudder. I don't think so. So it's worth checking out.
Honestly, for a horror focused streaming service, Shudder really, they have a good selection. I wouldn't say it's bad, but there's a lot of stuff you would think that would be on there that from what I've seen looking at their inventory isn't. And then you see some of this stuff that it's like, it looks so obscure and just it's like some of this, I swear, this is like a conspiracy theory I have about streaming services, is it because I've looked at several services' free movie categories, including in the horror section, and I just scroll down, and some stuff initially, the first few rows, the first few dozen options, you typically see stuff that's more well-known or stuff that had a bit more of a budget behind it. But then you get down into some of this absolutely, and again, I'm not looking down on these movies I'm about to mention because they're low budget. I'm looking down on them because I've watched so many movies like this, and they are legitimately shit. They look like not bottom of the barrel, beneath the barrel, underground, complete waste of time. I feel dumber for having watched them shit. Yeah, this is like the kind of shit that would make SOV look like Oscar winners. I'm talking stuff that some high schooler managed to talk some poor sucker at the network into showing on the Sci-Fi Channel. Well, and I'm not even talking the peak Sci-Fi Channel movies like what we got in the 90s and 2000s. Right. I'm talking stuff that would make Sharktopus look good. I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I'm saying that some of these free movies that you'll find on streaming services, I watch the trailers for them, and the trailers are enough for me to think, you did not put this on here because there is a ghost of a chance in all 9 circles of hell that anyone's going to look at it. You did it because you want to pad out your selection without having to pay for license to host movies that people would actually want to watch. You're doing this to pad out your inventory to justify your asking price for these streaming services. Same theory I have as to why they keep putting all this extra shit on phones that most people on average are not going to use, so they can justify charging more for the phones because they have shareholders, bosses, whoever's in charge of all this stuff. And they just have to find a reason and to keep justifying their prices going up. Otherwise, they might actually have to start charging you fairer prices, and they wouldn't make as much money.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's my tinfoil hat 2 cents.
Coincidence? I think not.
I agree with you. I think that's all very accurate. Now, I can't say that if you happen to stumble across one of these films that I'm talking about today, maybe Hallucinations, you wouldn't be like, what the fuck? Why would they put this on here? But if you know the history of it, it's a little better. God, I watched one. Oh gosh, I hope I can remember the title. It's like six circles of something of hell. And it was on Tubi. And mind you, Tubi's free, right? So, okay, they can get away with this, and I don't feel as mad at them as if I was like paying for a service. But it's like the 6 circles of something of hell. And it's the premise was like, oh, it's a VHS that they get. And I was like, well, of course I have to fucking watch it now. It's a VHS that's haunted, right? It was literally the worst movie I may have ever watched. No offense to the directors. You guys made a shit movie. Some good effects in there, I guess, some practical stuff, but like, so poorly written, such a waste of time. So I guess, maybe that's the risk of watching the free apps. You run into a lot of stuff that you're like, why? Because they put a good cover on it. It's like baiting, you put a good cover on there. It looks cool. You start it and it's just trash, but whatever.
Yeah. That was one of the categories we did in horror trivia, if I remember right. We look at all these posters for iconic horror movies that were made by artists from completely unaffiliated studios. I mean, I'm talking, these are the kind of artists that you would never hear of as far as horror advertising. You show like I'm going to throw out an example. Look up, I believe it was the Italian poster or the Italian promotional poster for The Exorcist. And this thing, it's really wild. Some of these pictures that the artists had to use, it was because you could tell so many of these artists understood virtually nothing about the movie, or the studio didn't give them an adequate description. It's like, I can only imagine you get some of these artists, some of whom may not have even spoken English well enough to understand what the studios or director was trying to translate to them as far as the vision they wanted to convey. You can really see a cultural and including a language barrier in terms of how all these big time horror movies are advertised in other countries, and how different cultures advertising ends up making the story and the characters and the monsters look really painting a picture of what the audience can go in expecting. And we look at some of these posters. We saw one for Evil Dead as well. And I'm just looking at some of this stuff just like, what in the hell happened during the discussion process? It's like, did you write the details for what you wanted these posters to convey on a napkin or something. It's like it's really incredible artwork. It's like, I'm not saying the posters themselves look bad. The artists, all the artists that did the ones that I saw that they showed us, is you really had some talented people here. But I saw stuff for like the Evil Dead, The Exorcist, Killer Clowns from Outer Space.
Mm-hmm.
He said, and it's like, I look at some of this stuff and I'm just like, it's one of those things where you would have loved to be a fly on the wall.
Right.
Because it's like, you could tell that these posters were made without any photographic frame of reference, not knowing what the creatures would look like. They really had to just go out of from their own imaginations to translate the premise as accurately as they could. And some of this stuff you end up with really just like treasures of horror or just Hollywood in general memorabilia. I could see a whole reality show being made out of like hunting these rare foreign posters down for collectors.
That'd be cool.
And some of these posters nowadays, that you try to buy a copy of one of them, like a genuine copy, they'll go for like hundreds, thousands, in rare cases, probably millions of dollars.
Wow.
And it's really amazing just to see. I don't know if there are any examples of this. I was getting ready to ask you, as far as if any shot on video horror films have gone on to achieve mainstream success, or if any of them went on to make a lot of money for people that bought them or merchandise related to them. It is incredible to me, some of the stuff that goes for a hot penny nowadays, is because you just never know. I'm sure the artists never knew that when they were making it. They were probably paid pennies for their labor. And next thing you know, we got people becoming, potential millionaires off of selling this stuff. Right.
So I don't know if I have a great example. There was, so you mentioned video violence earlier. That probably had the best quote unquote mainstream success story. So if you want to like dip your toe into the world of shot on video horror, video violence is the place to start. It has the best overall camera work of anything on my list, but maybe outside of The Burning Moon. But it's also, video violence is an American film, so a little easier to get into than a German film, probably. It was most widely distributed. It went to video stores all over the country. And apparently made on, this is the director said, made on a budget of $6. I don't know how that's possible, unless it was just for the meat and cheese he used in one particular scene. I don't know. But yeah, video violence probably has the best success story. Or you know what? There was another one, Boarding House from 1982. So that was by John Wintergate. And this is kind of like more of like more refined film. There's a lot more like art house elements to it. That film went on to be blown up to 35 millimeter and then shown in theaters, actually, which video violence didn't have a theater run. So Boarding House might be like the success story of shot on video. Boarding House is interesting because it's like it's a co-ed killer kind of film where this like group of girls living in a house with a telekinetic master man, very weird, are starting to get killed off one by one. So it's like a whodunit for a little bit. There's a lot of this like wild, shots and sequences and, almost like a telekinesis battle near the end. So it gets really interesting and kind of weird. It's kind of oddly cut though. So some things happen out of order almost when you watch that. I want to say Boarding House is on Tubi as well, if you want to check that out. If you're in the mood for kind of like a more artsy-ish film, but with also horror elements to it. So between those two, one of those two would be the winner of like, the most popular shot on video. But video violence, I think, is going to be more in the vein of if you like slashers or you like, more blood and guts, I would probably go towards video violence. it's the premise there. It's a VHS store owner. So I like that, right? I'm already about that. And he moves to a small town from New York, and the residents are acting a little funny. And maybe they want to make their own films. I don't know. It's worth checking out, though. Video Violence is a good place to dip your toe in to Shot on Video. Right. That was a very popular one.
And to your knowledge, just to ask real quick, with your experience in the history of these kinds of movies,
sure.
This is really a two-part question. One, is Shot on Video more of a uniquely American thing, or are there other countries that have done this over the years as well? Has it really started to spread as a culture in terms of inspiring foreign and low-budget horror filmmakers? So that's part one to my question. Part two, for people who are thinking of getting into trying to do this, what is the best way for SOV films to gain exposure? Is this the kind of stuff that typically starts out in local film festivals? Is it to try and gain traction, potentially gain studio interest as far as how you go about distributing them? And what is the typical process and cultural impact for this particular subgenre?
Sure. Well, so this subgenre is pretty much dead. I'm not going to lie. I mean, there might be a resurgence, right? So, for example, we interviewed an independent film project, the director and one of the actors from Vampire, that's Bampire, maybe 3 or 4 months ago on the show. And they are including segments of quote unquote Shot on Video in their film, because there's a guy, it's set in the 90s, their film is, and there's a guy carrying around one of the cameras that we were mentioning earlier on his shoulder. So they include some of that footage. I don't know, and maybe if someone knows, you can tell me, but I don't know that anyone is shooting currently any projects on video anymore. So that's to answer that question. And international influence at the time, yes. So again, it's going to be, people are seeing others who put these films out, and as far as distribution, yes, film festivals at the time were a way to get it out. A lot of it was word of mouth and like trying to get it in a local video store. But yeah, so I think the most notable international film off the top of my head that was shot on video that actually made a splash was, I think you mentioned it earlier, The Burning Moon by Olaf Ittenbach. So Olaf went on, and I don't have the title written down. I want to say he made another movie later called No Reason, which might be more popular. I want to say that was shot on DVI. But The Burning Moon is insane. Olaf is an artist when it comes to practical effects, blood effects, creature effects. He creates some wild shit. So The Burning Moon is the story of a teenager, a troubled teen, who is out doing some shit he shouldn't do. He comes home, and his parents say, "You're watching your sister tonight while we go out." And he has some drug problems, and he has some demons, and he hates his sister, but he goes in and says, "I'm going to read you a bedtime story." So it's 3 stories. It's a compilation of the stories that this brother, psychopathic brother, tells his sister for bedtime. And Olaf goes crazy with his effects. If you have any sensitivities around dental stuff, that film will mess you up. So, yeah, that's probably the most notable. I know there are some that came out of Japan as well. I don't have the titles off the top of my head. I haven't seen them. But yeah, I think it's the same sentiment, right? I've seen The Evil Dead. I've seen, Night of the Living Dead. I've seen, Day of the Dead, maybe, right? And I want to make a zombie film, or I want to make a demon film. So these people did that all over. As far as what gained notoriety, it's probably the more brutal stuff from overseas that made a splash in the American markets. But yeah, that's. I hope I answered all your questions. Did I miss anything?
No, that sounds that covers all the bases. Probably the only example I know off the top of my head in terms of like a more recent example of a mainstream film that inspired a lot of knockoffs from people trying to do it on their own, like in their houses or in their own bedrooms, bathrooms, whatever. Or probably the original Saw, because like Saw is one of my favorite low budget horror films of all time. Like I have so much respect for what they managed to do for the budget of that movie and how much they were able to pull off with making such a character in itself out of that bathroom, and just really making the story feel bigger than what they actually had to work with as far as the sets and locations. And so really creating a grand scope for what would become, as we've seen, a still ongoing franchise to this day. But that's probably one of the more recent examples, if I had to guess, for inspiring. The really bottom of the barrel, like $6 budget horror is people trying to do a Saw knockoffs it's a lot like when everybody and their grandmother was trying to imitate Halloween, all the way down to people just, dressing up and doing the whole stalker / routine, chasing people with a weapon in their backyard. I have seen so many, more than I can remember. I don't know any titles off the top of my head, but there was a big do it DIY, we'll do it ourselves at home kind of craze that I remember coming about as a result of, I wasn't born yet, but I remember learning about those crazes that were started by, Halloween, Friday the 13th, Saw, Scream. There's certain movies just it really kickstarted this craze of bottom budget imitators. There's some of which did manage to innovate just enough to carve out their own identity, but it became just like an ocean of knockoffs and in many cases direct ripoffs of people just trying to, kind of get their piece of the pie. Like, hey, I'm gonna make the next hit in this genre. And then some of them end up developing cult followings. Most of them don't go anywhere. Yeah. And it really shows you kind of the double-edged sword. My friend David Dave, a former co-host of Horror Movie Talk, he wrote an article about this back when I was one of HMT's blog writers, how the slasher genre killed horror movies for a while. Because of that explosion of the slasher craze and countless imitators of Michael, Jason, Freddy, Pinhead, and so on. And it really just oversaturated the genre to the point. It's very much like what happened in recent years with the oversaturation of the zombie genre, which is now starting to make a comeback, post Walking Dead. But you just get these successful films that, everybody, all the way down to, teenagers working with their little sisters or brothers, whatever. Everybody wants to make the next big thing. Everyone thinks they're going to make the next Halloween, Friday the 13th, Elm Street, whatever. Yeah. And it ends up having the opposite effect where people end up being exposed to so much of the shitty imitators that it kind of turns them off to looking at the more low budget cult horror that's actually good, the stuff that actually gets creative. And I really do encourage people. I know there is a lot of shit out there. Like I've seen it myself, and believe me, I wish I could get those hours of my life back. Please don't let the turds that distract you from the diamonds, and that don't label this whole subgenre or the medium of low budget horror in general based on the turds. Like try to look past their stink and really look up lists of people who recommend which ones they will tell you are good, and just give them a chance, even if it's only 10-30 minutes of your time. I mean, just pick one and that you think will at least entertain you long enough for you to feel like, hey, this wasn't a complete waste of my time, and just give it a chance, because you never know when one of these films might surprise you. You can't predict the quality or lack thereof in an entire genre based on the quality or lack thereof of a few works. You just can't. Like, you're going to miss out on so much if you judge media that way.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. And I think there's so much to sift through, right? And I try to respect everybody's art, right? Because it is their art. If it's not a direct ripoff, like you were saying earlier, if the story is unique, I can look past some of like the actually, I can look past a lot of the quality issues if the story can keep me engaged. And there's one which I will recommend, but it's not for like the lighthearted by any means, because it deals with some serious topics in a weird way. So it's called 16 Tongues. It's from 2003. It's directed by Scooter McRae. The theme is, should protagonists deserve empathy, right? So should every protagonist deserve empathy, even when they are quote unquote the good guy? And this came out, I think, what would I say, 2003. So in the midst of, the George W. Bush post 9/11 era. So were the good guys good in what they were doing? That's kind of where this was themed from. So it's based, the story, it revolves around a police officer who had been killed in a terrorist attack, an explosion, and was put back together, skin grafted with the tongues of 16 fellow victims of that attack. And then he was kind of set loose to be a near vigilante. This one's very, very hard to watch in the sense that Scooter McRae kind of predicted how the world would look in a constant media state, which is funny because it's where we exist now. But his interpretation of that, his extreme interpretation of that, is that there was going to be porn in your face for the entire time. So, for example, like all of the wallpaper across all of the set, which is a hotel, is pornographic. Every single room that you walk into in this, like every hotel room, has pornography playing on the TV, and the only way to turn it off is if you pay to turn it off. You're constantly bombarded with media and gross media. So it's not something to watch with a group, probably. It's not appealing. That's not how he made it. It's very grating. So it's not pornography in itself by any means. But that is a tough one to watch. It's got some interesting, characters, an assassin who can't operate anymore. She doesn't have the ability to operate anymore in her previous role because she's been modified to have, I'm not going to say specifically what it is, but to have an issue that won't allow her to kill anymore. Anyway, it's a wild one. So you can't find that one on streaming that I know of. It's available from Vinegar Syndrome, but if you have the chance one day to see it, I would check it out at your own risk, if that makes sense.
I'll be sure to link Vinegar Syndrome in the description if I can find the website for it. Is it still going as far as like a service to purchase these things from? Actively?
Oh yeah, they sell media. Vinegar Syndrome is like a boutique like media house and distributor, so you can buy Blu-rays and DVDs and steel books and all kinds of stuff from them. And they usually carry some popular titles as well, but they're going to have some some more specific like genre films widely available. I think the 16 Tongues Blu-ray was like $12 or something, so they have some good deals. But again, that one's a tough watch. So if you are able at some point in the future to find it on streaming or some, service, I would check it out before I buy it. It's a weird one to have in the collection, but it all shot on video.
It just to give people an idea of what they'll be in for. Is this at the level of, let's say, Terrifier, Human Centipede, or a Serbian film?
Oh no, not in its violence. There's not nearly there's sexual violence to an extent, but it's an onslaught of visual terror. Does that make sense? So like you're just being kind of constantly pounded with, like I said, pornography. You're being constantly pounded with these like lighting kind of things. And it's, that's
kind of like a Clockwork Orange.
Kind of. Yeah, a little bit. I don't want to give too much away. It's worth a watch. It's a unique story, and technically, your hero, right, the cop, your protagonist, he makes you hate this guy from the beginning. So it's an interesting watch for sure. It's unique. What I will transition into the antithesis of this, right? Because this story was very much, 16 tongues, sexual violence, over sexualized content throughout the entire thing, to this is the same director did 2 short shot on video films, and you can find both of these on YouTube, and I do highly suggest you watch these. This is by Cecilia Condit Condit. She did 2 films. One was called Beneath the Skin in 1981, and one was called Possibly in Michigan from 1983, which actually a scene from Possibly in Michigan went viral on TikTok, I don't know, a year or 2, something like that ago. So her work has kind of made resurgences here and there because it is shorter and it's very stylized. She wrote these films based on an experience that she had personally. She was dating a guy who turned out to have murdered his previous girlfriend, kept her in his closet, and then put her in a trunk, this body. So Cecilia was dating this guy in his apartment for 4 years. And for the entire time that she was with him, he had a dead body in the apartment with them. He ended up, getting, caught, but he fled. So they found out he did this. He fled to another country. And I guess he was for like 30 years out of the US. So she, with her traumatic experience, wrote these 2 shot on video films, where the first, which is Beneath the Skin, essentially tells the story, that story. It's all true. And then Possibly in Michigan, super stylized. There's this killer cannibal man who wears this wild mask, and it's a musical too, which is funny. But this guy follows Cecilia and her friend through a mall and then back to their home. And there's a funny story where she's telling her friend that her aunt tried to dry off her poodle by putting it in a microwave. Wild. It's super, super weird. Her poodle tried to dry off her poodle by putting it in a microwave. And they're singing this in a musical, and the friend just goes, no. Like all this, it's like, so that's the part that went, I think, viral on TikTok at one point. But they end up defeating this like predator, right? So, where 16 tongues as one side, on the other side, you have Cecilia, who's created a film about defeating like this evil male cannibal. I think that's one thing about shot on video that I like, right? Some people would say a lot of horror is misogynistic, right? And I think I agree. There's a lot of themes of these monster men attacking women. And when you can point out, especially shot on video, where these female directors have taken the lead and they've written their stories, that's a really cool thing. And to transition from there, there was like probably the last one I'll talk about, if I can just jump into it, is Each Time I Kill from 2007, which was directed by Doris Wishman. I don't know if have you ever heard of Doris Wishman?
The name doesn't ring a bell, but but the name of the film, I did see that on the Bleeding Skull article list.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. So Doris Wishman was actually a pretty active director throughout like the 50s, 60s, 70s. I think she wrote, directed, produced over 30 films. All of them, interestingly, were in like the sexploitation genre. So, those like, what are some of her titles? Nude on the Moon, Bad Girls Go to Hell, Satan Was a Lady.
So this is a female director who participated in what you would call horror's history of misogynistic, or at least objectifying female characters.
Right. Yeah. So she did. Right. So, but I find that interesting, right? Because she took the lead and maybe took some power away from, other directors. She was very popular in those films that she made. And she made this last film, which was Each Time I Kill. It was the last film she ever made. She had cancer and she decided she was going to write one more. So she hadn't done anything since like the 90s. And then she comes out of retirement and says, well, I'm going to die soon. So I am going to write my last film. It has this like interesting commentary on like the failings of the human body. So this character is what she deems to herself as undesirable, right? She wishes she had different skin, different teeth, different hair. And she finds this locket and an incantation, and it allows her to kill someone and take the feature that she wants from them. So Doris had done all of these films over the years. So she had a ton of fans and followers. So in this last film of hers, it features Linnea Quigley. And this is a shot on video horror that most people probably haven't seen, right? So Linnea Quigley's there. John Waters is in this film briefly, So and she has help from all of these people to help her make this last film, which was interesting. So that one's worth a watch. That one's definitely worth a watch. But yeah, there's a wide variety of themes on these shot on video films. It's not just, these gross themes of men mutilating women. There are stories from women that you can check out as well. I think that's an important thing to point out.
And it's not just people trying to do, gross out over the top effects, or like, hey, here's a guy dressed up in a really obvious costume trying to be an alien, and like there's more to it. There's more nuance to it than that.
Yeah. So I think you made a good point that there's a lot of crappy movies that you have to sift through, but when you find some of the gems, I think that's where people find their love for shot on video. And there are some serious aficionados and collectors of the genre. And I think that's why, because if you find the right titles and you take the time. So I don't know if I said this before, but those Cynthia Condit films are both on YouTube as well. So check them out. Right. And you may find a style that you that you like and that you can get behind. So yeah, there are a couple honorable mentions, which I'm just going to throw out the title and let you decide if you want to watch them or not. Like the Necrophiles, 1997 was actually quoted as being the wildest movie I think that it was Chris Farley had ever seen. It was so funny. That movie is absurd. It might be one of the craziest films I've ever watched. It is about a zombie serial killer who's brought back to life by an amateur cult. And he is, he's assaulting people. It is absurd. It's absolutely absurd. That's like 50-50. Should you watch it? I don't know. You guys might want to do some research on that.
No.
There was one more that I wanted to mention because I think it's important to note that it's shot on video spanned, multiple cultures as well, right? So we talked about shot on video in Germany, and there's some that came out of Japan. Well, blaxploitation. So Black Devil Doll from Hell is one of the cult classics in shot on video, which was directed by a Black director, Chester N. Turner. He made this film when he was pre-college, I believe, had no experience whatsoever, and made a deal with Hollywood Home Entertainment, and they put in Hollywood video stores his film, and he kind of forgot about it, and it turned into this crazy cult classic that even had like a quote unquote sequel made by another director called Black Devil Doll in 2007. This guy didn't even realize that his film was so popular. It got put into, there's a copy held in the Yale University Library. And he didn't find out until 2013 that anybody liked his movie. So, it's kind of wild how that kind of stuff happens,
How about that?
Yeah. So that one's interesting. I said that each one is very regional. That one's very interesting that you see, the culture of the people in Chicago in like the early or, mid 80s and how they interact with one another and what their stories look like. So you get some very interesting regional stuff out of these films. So, but yeah,
all right.
That's kind of.
I'll definitely put that on the list.
That one's a hard watch. I'm not gonna lie. That one's a hard watch, but yeah.
I don't want to take up any more of your time. So, are there any last minute recommendations that you would make as far as something that people should definitely see to give them an intro to this subgenre?
I would say if you are a gore hound, if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm a practical effects fiend, The Burning Moon, Olaf Ittenbach. If you are if you're a more slasher fan, kind of easier going, Video Violence will be the way to go for you. Those two are easy enough to get into because the filming, the cinematography makes it easy to watch. If you go check out Weasels Rip My Flesh and you're not someone who can get behind like kind of unsteady cam, and stuff like that, then it might be a hard thing to walk into. But yeah, Video Violence or The Burning Moon are going to be easy intros into the shot on video world.
All right. Well, Dylan, thanks so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to get an education from you about this. It's really opened up a whole new world to not just myself, but I think to hopefully several listeners as well. So where can people find you or find VHS Doom? What you want to plug? You want to plug your social media or anything like that?
Oh yeah, sure. You guys can. So if you check out or you search VHS Doom podcast on any Apple, Spotify, YouTube, whatever, we're there. Everywhere we are, TikTok, Instagram, X. I think we still have an X, maybe not, or Twitter. I'm going to call it Twitter. But yeah, VHS Doom anywhere. We have a big green logo that says VHS Doom with a bunch of slime and 90s stuff on it. We'll post a bunch of tapes there and, come check us out. Yeah.
And this wraps up the last episode of the first year of Horror Convos. Put another way, you can consider this the finale of our season 1. I am so grateful to my friends and family for encouraging me to start this show. I hesitated for years to even seriously consider trying it. I had virtually no confidence that anyone outside of my personal social circles would care what I had to say about any of this stuff. I mean, I've always, for as long as I can remember, or going back to, very early age, I've always been a fan of horror. I've always been opinionated about it. I just didn't think I could say much of anything that hasn't already been said, let alone anything that would really entertain people much. So it may not seem like a big deal starting a podcast, and maybe it comes naturally to some people. That was definitely not the case for me. This took a pretty significant amount of courage. And even after the number of episodes we've done thus far, I am very much still a rookie. I am still learning. I have a lot to learn. I am just beginning here. I don't know if this show will ever become a success among the horror community, let alone the podcasting market. That's not really why I set out to do this. Like, I knew before I even made the decision to start this journey that it would most likely never make much money. I have no illusions about that. But I do want to continue working at this and hopefully keep supplying content people can enjoy for at least the foreseeable future. As a wise person once said, tomorrow never knows. In the meantime, to everyone out there, I wish you a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy New Year, all the happy holidays from now into the winter season. If you have any requests for future topics, please let us know. Do you have any recommendations for our next discussion of independent/low-budget horror? Comment below. Don't be shy with those opinions. Remember, this is more than a podcast. It is a dialogue between horror lovers. Here is your regular reminder that Horror Convos is available to listen to on YouTube and Spotify. New episodes release every other Wednesday. Please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss when our newest content is uploaded. Until we talk again, and I hear some mistletoe calling my name, good night, be well, be good to each other, and happy holidays.